Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today, we have Joanne and Paul and Reva, who will be facilitating a panel for us on the Global Learning Toolkit. The session will be an hour long. We will stop at I will interrupt at about 5 minutes before that, just to let everyone know that we're nearing the end. And the team have asked that you, especially because there's such a small number of us, we can keep our cameras on if we like, and that would help, unless of course then the technology fails us. And also we can feel free to ask questions out loud using our microphone or post questions into the chat. And over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Katrina. Welcome to everyone who has come. It's really nice to see you all. It's good that the presentation is recorded because hopefully other people will be interested in having a look as well. So we encourage you to participate. This is a panel discussion called the Global Learning Toolkit, providing relevant learning and teaching practices to enhance global citizenship. So the three of us, Reva, Paul and me, will introduce ourselves a bit more in a minute. But the most important thing to do, I think, at the moment is our acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we speak, the Noongar Whadjuk people, and we wish to acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to them and their culture and to their elders past, present and future. And we encourage you to put into the chat the traditional owners of the land on which you sit at the moment as well. And if they're the same as ours, which in many cases they are, that you could acknowledge that as well if you would like to. Thank you, Reva. So I'm Joanne Castelli. I'm an educational designer STEM in the Faculty of Science and Engineering at Curtin University. I've just been in this role for 1 month, and my co-panelists will introduce themselves now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reva Ramia, and I'm a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Science and Engineering at Curtin, and I basically, look after the development of language and communication skills across the faculty. And over to you, Paul.
My name is Paul Kebbell. I have the same role as Reva, but in Faculty of Health Sciences. I've been at Curtin for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I've lived and taught and lectured in 8 different countries around the world.
Thank you, Paul. And I forgot to say as well, I have the University of WA icon next to me because I started this work with Reva and Paul when I was there, so I'd like to acknowledge that I was there as well. And I also forgot to say that we are running this presentation that you can see through Menti. So we'd love you to go to menti.com and put in the code that you see there in the chat, 523404999, so that you can answer some of the questions that we have there. We'll answer them too, so we'll try and keep it as anonymous as possible between us. If you can't do that, then that's fine as well. You will still see all of the presentation, and you'll still be able to put comments in the chat. But
yes, and I think people should feel free to just switch on their mics and participate.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start off actually sort of describing the context. As you can see in our title, we talk about global citizenship. And global citizenship, is a fairly new construct, actually. And it's actually evolved of the idea of internationalization. So given the extreme challenges faced by society globally, I think the idea of global citizenship has actually been summarized in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And when we first embarked on this project, we were generally thinking of the term internationalization, but we've come to embrace, the term global citizenship. And, it's important for us to, so if we are going to talk about global citizenship, it's important for us to go back a little bit in history and just look at how the construct of internationalization has come about. So what Joanne is going to do in the next couple of slides is basically unpack this notion of internationalization for you by presenting several definitions. But before we do that, I'd just like to tell you how we're going to structure this session. As I mentioned just now, Joanne is going to actually sort of deconstruct this whole idea of internationalization by putting forward several, definitions. And after that, I am actually going to lead a bit of a discussion on difference and, how embracing this idea of difference, what it means to embrace this idea of difference and how it's related to this global thinking. Paul will then follow with a little bit about language, because, if we're going to talk about global citizenship and internationalization in the context of higher education, we cannot not talk about the medium of instruction, the English language. Joanne will then follow up with a discussion on culture and how culture and language matters in relation to enabling global citizenship. And we will then proceed to finalize this discussion by introducing you to this idea that we've come together about, and it's called the Global Learning Toolkit. So without further ado, I'll call upon Joanne.
Okay, and we do have this slide here that's got our question that's related to the context. So is the experience we are providing for our students really preparing them for the realities of global citizenship and their future careers working with culturally and linguistically diverse people? So that's what we're going to explore. And Katrina, I was just thinking, I know that you're the moderator, but are you able to join in the discussion and the mentee as well and pretend also to be one of the attendees? Because we'd love to hear get your views as well. So first of all, a definition. What is internationalization? And Knight's definition from 2015, and actually earlier than that, and Knight made a revision in 2015, it's the intentional process of integrating an international, intercultural or global dimension into the purpose, functions or delivery of post-secondary education. And in 2015, DeWitt and Hunter also added a little bit to the end of it, and they said to do that in order to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff and to make a meaningful contribution to society. So it's all about our students being able to make that meaningful contribution to society through their global citizenship. And we're just going to have a look at another definition of internationalisation, and we found this really interesting because this is from the point of view from a Chinese scholar, Gu, from 2001, and it was quoted in a paper by Jeanette Ryan in 2011. So it's a different point of view on internationalisation. And Gu says that it's the internationalisation of education can be expressed in the exchange of culture and values, mutual understanding and the respect for difference. The internationalisation of education does not simply mean the integration of different national cultures or the suppression of one national culture by another culture. So we really like this because Gu brings in the ideas of exchanging culture and values, mutual understanding, respect for difference, not just having some sort of international, having international students in your class. That's not internationalisation.
Historically, if we go back and look at how internationalization has been conceptualized, it's mainly been thought of in terms of a westernized, largely Anglo-Saxon and predominantly English-speaking sort of paradigm. And, that's the construct that I think is the sort of the dominant narrative globally.
Yeah.
And generally, internationalization has been mostly about, has got this commercial agenda attached to it. It's seen as mainly something that's used to increase, capital.
Bums on seats.
Yep. Okay.
As they say. So just moving to the next slide. So Paul and Reva and I, as we've worked together on this project together, have moved more towards the idea of global learning rather than that idea of internationalisation for the reasons that Reva has just talked about. So Kanan and you say that global learning requires the integration of multiple and often diverse and conflicting perspectives across both macro and micro contexts. So in global learning, difference is as much a primary component as is similarity. And I think that we need to see that difference, is a good thing that we can, in our learning and teaching, it's something that we want to celebrate, that we want to celebrate the differences in our students. And I wonder if anyone in the audience or any of the panel would like to make a comment about these definitions of internationalisation and our move towards the idea of global learning.
What I was going to say is that I've worked in higher education for pretty much all my working life. And I remember when I worked at ECU many, many moons ago, I actually was asked to write a paper on internationalisation. And it was very, very early days, and it has come a colossal distance since then. So the paper I did was basically an audit trying to see how many units within ECU had any degree of internationalisation, which was this idea of some sort of recognition that overseas students would be studying the unit and some sort of modification of the content in response to that. But that was it. And there were very few. So this would have been, I would say, probably 25 years ago.
Dominant model.
Yeah.
So the take that you've presented a completely different definition of what internationalisation and global learning is, and I have to say it's a very encouraging and much richer perspective and take on what internationalisation was originally seen as. So
yeah. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Claire, for that. And actually, we constantly, we given the importance placed on these ideas of diversity, inclusion, and equity at this present context, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the fact that, we've got all these foreign students, international students coming in, and often we tend to think it's a one-way street in terms of, what they can stand to benefit from, the learning experience. But what we fail to consider is, what our own students, our domestic students, also tend to be able to sort of experience if they are willing to open up, and we see this more as a two-way street, and I guess that's where we've been coming from.
I think that one-way street approach, going back to what you were talking about earlier, was very much how to adapt the curriculum to accept and work with international students coming into our learning environment and our linguistic environment. And traditionally, that's where this concept of internationalisation was broadcast, but it's really fundamentally wrong, and that's what we feel uncomfortable with.
Yeah. So, you were going to say something?
Oh, before we go on, I know that a couple of people have joined us. So we're actually showing the presentation through Menti. and you'll see that there's the Katrina's put something in the chat as well. So if you go to menti.com and put in the code, you'll be able to play along with us. If you are unable to do that, that doesn't matter, because you will still see the screen, you will still see our responses. You can still put the responses in the chat, you can still talk to us. And if you see us playing with our phone, especially me, because I'm right here, it's because I'm using Menti on my phone. So if you want to use another screen, you can also do it on your phone quite easily. Thanks, Reva.
Thanks for that, Joanne. So, just now, I think Joanne ended her introduction of the definitions by quoting Kahn and Agnew, and she talked about how difference is as much a primary component as is similarity. So I think this is a good segue for us to actually to start talking about difference. So just to start off this discussion, what does the word difference bring to mind? So if you go to menti.com, you can and put in the code, there'll actually be options for you to enter, some of these words that come to your mind.
I'm not 100% sure what you're asking us to do. So we have to put in a response to stressful, not the same, and exciting?
No.
What does the word difference bring to mind?
Oh, I understand.
These are words.
These are some words that other participants have come up with. So what does difference mean to you personally?
In the context of what we're talking about.
Uh-huh.
There we go.
That's better.
So there are some really, great words coming through. Something that I like is this word here, opportunity, exciting, diversity. We also have words like conflict and compromise. Interesting. So a bit of a word cloud here for us. And what I'm going to actually do is now, pick up on this word diversity and talk about diversity, because sometimes we tend to think of diversity as a one-dimensional construct. So, either it's gender or race or, ableism. But if we look at how diversity is actually reflected, it's a multi-dimensional construct. So at the very base of it is this idea of, it is what you bring. One dimension is, it's your personality. And your personality here is, you could be introverted or extroverted. You could be a perfectionist. So these are things that really reflect who you are as a person, And within this, another dimension is, the inherent attributes. For instance, how do you identify in terms of gender, your ethnicity, age, your physical ability, and so on and so forth. Another dimension is, your acquired attributes. So your socio-demographic status, your marital status, your religion, your education, your work experience. And we even have another dimension. So we've kind of limited this to 4 dimensions, but in actual fact, I think there There's some models that go on to talk about 5 or 6 dimensions. And what we need to understand is that when we talk about diversity, we need to talk about intersectionality, you know. So if we talk about women, not all women are the same. There's still, you know, a big difference between, you know, for instance, if you take the idea of race and age. So, it's actually a range of individual attributes that intersect. And discrimination can be experienced when an individual's attributes intersect in ways that contradict whatever dominant societal norms that are present. You know, so the main group or the dominant you know, population. So I'm going to give you an example here. So in terms, let's say we have this particular student. So this example is again an example from the higher education context. Personality-wise, she's an introvert. Inherent, she's female, age 26. A quiet, married with children, and she's a foreign student, international student who has English as an additional language. So what kind of discrimination might the student face and why? So this is the question that you need to answer in your next Menti exercise. So we're talking about a female student who is married, who is considered international, has English as an additional language. She's a bit of an introvert. What kind of assumptions would people be making of her? Because, you know, generally, whether we like it or not, all of us have biases. And often, you know, these biases drive particular assumptions that we make about individuals.
Too far away for me to read. Can you read them out?
Yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
So sexism, racism, and possibly ageism. Yes, so she's female, she's introvert, she's an introvert. So generally, you know, the stereotypical kind of, the stereotype international female student, especially when it comes to you know, students from particular regions, we tend to assume that they are passive and, you know, unable to voice. So these are some of these assumptions that we make about students, which then in turn sort of drive, you know, our teaching decisions and, you know, those sorts of things, our classroom interactions. So exclusion, people may not want to work with her because of a possible language barrier. So this is something that students who don't have English as a first language often face when it comes to, you know, group activities. There's reluctance for domestic students to sort of have them in the group, or, you know, as soon as they are assigned a student who looks like a bit foreign, then, you know, it's like, oh no, this group work is going to be a bit of a mess. So yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything, Joanne?
Well, with that one, I think sometimes people will look at someone and think, oh, I don't know that I want to work with them just in case their language isn't so great, but their language might be, you know, perfect English. The other thing they might, well, when I say perfect English, Paul will get onto this later, is there a perfect English? But they might, be able to communicate in English perfectly well, not necessarily with the same accent or anything like that. But the other form of discrimination she might encounter is because she has a child, and people might think, oh, she might not have the time to do this, or she might have to go to the school pickup and things like that. So,
So that's really a great point. So
I think what you were saying earlier on, there is a discrimination, and it seems to be happening constantly. And now the feedback that I get from my international students, I had a conversation with a group last week, and they were still saying that there is discrimination from the lecturer. The lecturer will not engage with them. There seems to be a barrier, and I think this is something that we really need to work on and work at the lecturer level as well as all the other levels. But lecturers not being able to engage with somebody because they have these implicit biases that they need to overcome to be able to engage appropriately with our international students is something that we really need to strive for.
Claire's actually asked a question, can we give an age? She's 25 years old.
Yep.
25 years old and got a child.
Yeah.
Introvert, female, 26, married with children, international student.
Okay.
Yep.
So good segue.
Yeah.
Paul mentioned implicit bias. So what does implicit bias mean to you?
By the way, you can put things in the chat as well if you can't get into Menti.
Yeah, generally, some of these assumptions that we have, that we're really not aware of the fact that we actually have these assumptions. And, it's really impossible for us as human beings not to have biases, because these are things that, it's sort of developed as part of growing up, because you are constructed mainly through your interactions with whatever environment that you are in, and all of us, it doesn't matter whether whatever race that you come from, you still tend to have implicit biases. And a lot of it is actually hidden, or it's something that we are unaware of, or even if we are aware of it, I don't know whether you've heard of System 1 thinking and System 2 thinking. There's this psychologist, I forget his name right now, but he's very famous for actually differentiating between System 1 thinking, System 2 thinking, where one system is where you are aware, consciously aware of your thinking, and the other system is the system that we revert to when when things are kind of really go, when you're in a hurry, when you feel stressed, you generally move to this other system of thinking where your responses and interactions are very automatic. So implicit bias.
And I think it's important to state that these implicit biases are quite natural. Whether they're right or wrong, they are a part of who we are. But the fact of being able to reflect inwardly and assess our own implicit biases is a really very important element in learning and teaching. But it also is our students also we need to design learning that allows our students to have this inward reflection, have a look at their biases and unpack them. Everyone, we all need to be able to do it and accept that this is often the case, but it's how we deal with them. And we need to build learning around how to deal with these implicit biases.
Yeah. So it's about us being aware of what our biases are, and
Reba, was that psychologist Daniel Kahneman?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't. Levon came up with that.
Excellent. Thank you,
pretend
Levon.
it was me.
Okay, and I think, the reason why we are having this discussion is because, when we are creating, when we're trying to create this learning environment, it's really important that we have this idea of equity, that we embrace the idea of equity rather than equality. From my experience, I find that many of us, and this is something that I've come to learn about myself when I first embarked on first started teaching. For me, it was, I need to make things equal, that all my students need to be treated the same. And over the years, I've come to understand that not all of us start off the same, and there are many inequalities that actually stand in the way of students achieving, their potential. So it's really, really important that we understand the concept of equity and try to create an equitable environment for all our students, so that to enable all of them to succeed. So again, this idea of difference is fundamental to this concept that we are trying to discuss here today, this idea of global citizenship and the higher education learning environment. If you're not able to negotiate this difference and be more accepting of each other and working on ensuring that students have accommodations made to ensure that that they don't miss out because of these differences, then that's more equitable. So, Paul.
So, in kind of summary, and what we are trying to work towards is this idea that global citizenship is not culturally centric, it is not geographically centric, it's not English or English dialect centric, neither is it ideologically centric. So we need to design learning that encompasses those concepts. Now, I'd like to talk about a couple of my experiences to put this into practical terms. I'm actually going to start with the bottom one there, the Thailand, Perth. So a number of years ago, I was engaged in providing a 1 month intensive program for English language teachers from Thailand. So the Thai Ministry of Education sent these teachers and teacher trainers and academics here to Curtin to engage with this 1 month, 4 week intensive program about developing English language pedagogy. Now, I, along with my colleagues, we were well qualified, well experienced teachers and teacher trainers, and we designed a course that we thought would be dynamic, would introduce all the relevant and contemporary concepts around English language teaching, and we filled this program with all these wonderful ideas about how to teach English. At the end of the course, we brought the teachers together to reflect on the course, and being Thai people, they were very polite, but equally pragmatic. And they said to us, yeah, well, we had a wonderful 4 weeks. We loved everything you provided for us, and we could probably use somewhere between 20 and 25% of what you provided, because you hadn't bothered to have a look at our culture, our learning setting, our schools, our environment, our culture around education. We hadn't, and they were completely right. We had imposed on them our idea of what English language teaching should look like, and it was a shock. And it certainly, for me, instigated this whole idea, this whole notion that I have been working with over the last 20 years. Move ahead 17 years. 3 years ago, I was in Singapore at Nanyang Technological University, and I was providing, again, an intensive program for Mandarin teachers, predominantly from China. These Mandarin teachers were training to work internationally. So they were going to be working in international schools, in state schools around the world. So the idea of the course that was provided by NTU was to introduce these teachers to the kind of language that they would need to operate within their teaching environment, their schools, but also their cultural environment. And this could be anywhere in the world. They were going to be sent all over the place. And secondly, an introduction to pedagogy that may be different and may be used within curriculum from different countries, particularly in international school settings. So the question then, for me, in designing the course is, well, what English do I use in my teaching? To a certain extent, that's pretty standard because I have my own English. But what English do I teach? What English do I involve to broaden the understanding of multi-Englishes around the world? So I had one teacher, for example, who was going to be working in an international school in Fiji. Now, I've spent a lot of time in Fiji, and I love Fiji, but Fiji has its own English, Fijian English. So I have to develop the capacity of the teacher who's going to live and work in Fiji to work within a Fiji English environment. And the same with the pedagogy. You know, some teachers were going to be teaching in really quite didactic teaching environments, where others would be in a more sort of open teaching environment. So again, I have to provide. I can't teach everything. Of course, I can't. I can't teach specific elements. So I need to develop a course that is developing the capacities of these people to operate in these environments. And I think this relates directly to what we should be doing in higher education at universities, developing these capacities within all of our students to be able to operate culturally and linguistically. Okay, just out of interest, here is ranking of language. So you can see by this diagram that by far the most users of English are those who have English as an additional language. We haven't got the...
They still haven't done it yet.
Oh, I see, sorry.
No, we haven't done it
So
yet.
we're basically trying to get you to rank, you know, the users, the number of users of
just
these
given you a
different
clue.
Englishes. Yeah, and Paul might have just let the cat out of the bag.
Mhm.
It saves time.
Yes, we do
Okay,
need to
so
get on.
I'll hand this over to you then. Sorry, the quiz.
Yeah, so I think we're just giving people a bit of time to get on to the question and do their rankings.
I'll just put it in.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right, I'm just getting
Takes a bit of time. We'll just give a couple of more minutes before we discuss the answer.
And panel, we have 15 minutes left. Yeah, so, yeah.
Joanne, can I tell a joke while you're waiting for the answer?
Yeah, go.
Okay, so this joke,
Claire, I know you.
people will understand. The joke isn't as funny. It's an old joke, and given the context, people will be able to understand it. So the joke goes something like this. Well, it's not very funny, but it's poignant. There's a terrible car accident involving a man and his son. The father dies, unfortunately, and the child is rushed to the ER department. When the doctor enters, they rush to the child and exclaim, "Oh my God, this is my son." How is that possible?
How's that possible?
I don't know, I lost you after.
I have actually heard it before
It's all to do with unconscious bias. I'll quickly say it again.
Right.
There's a terrible car accident involving a man and his son. The father dies and the child is rushed to the ER. When the doctor walks in, they rush to the child and say, "Oh my God, this is my son."
I know, I got it now because I listened to you better.
I think I just wanted to slip it in because I just think it's a classic example.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people go, "Oh, adopted son," and they just agonize over it, not realizing that the doctor is in fact a woman.
It's actually a woman.
And is the mother. So, sorry, that was just an aside, but I'm sure the votes.
No, it was good.
Yeah, it's important.
I think, Paul, we've got these responses that have come in. Thanks for that, Claire.
Are they right, Paul? I can't see them.
I can't see.
So monthly
In there.
Here's the answers. We've given you the answers.
So, go back to what I was saying before I messed everything up. As we can see, English is used by those who have English as an additional language far more than any other group of English language users around the globe.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's the capacity to understand this concept for all of our students, and particularly our students, our domestic students who have English as their only language, to understand that English, even this idea that English is used far more by people who have English as an additional language than they do English as an only language, should open their minds to the fact that we have this idea of English as an international language, and how to engage with people who use English as an additional language or as one of their first languages. Again, having been in Singapore for a while, and I've also lived in Malaysia and Brunei Darussalam for a number of years, so I'm very comfortable with, say, Malaysian English and Singapore English, which is perfectly acceptable forms of English, but they are just another form of English.
Okay.
So,
You might have to.
should we move on?
Yeah.
So again, to summarise.
We can go back to that. Yeah.
To summarise, what we believe, global citizenship in higher education is learning and developing the capacity to function within and across different Englishes, and to engage with and across multiple cultures. And this is the fundamental concept behind what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, so rather than seeing accents and, as problematic, it's more important that we develop the capacity to be more accepting and, learn how to work with those accents.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good segue.
So Paul's just talked about learning and development of the capacity to engage within and across multiple cultures, and we've used that word quite a few times during the presentation already. But what does culture mean to you? Cool bananas is just someone's example, but you can put one word or a couple of words or a little sentence about what you think culture means to you in the Menti, or in the chat if you can't access the Menti. And I will do that as well. Okay, so things are coming up like the way we live and think, what makes us human is our culture, what we do within our own country is our culture. Just wait for another couple of maybe responses to that. You can unmute yourself and say what you think as well.
Yeah.
Maybe write a sentence if one word's not enough, or two words are not enough. Okay, all great responses, and you know, there is no one answer to this. And we can define culture. This is one way that I thought that we could define it, just from things that I've read and people that I've spoken to. It can be defined as the ideas, customs, values and social behaviour of a particular people or society, or put more simply, it's the things we do and how and why we do them. So do we have a bit of kind of an agreement about that? So cultural competence could then be thought of as our ability to understand and accept these. And we've got another little poll for you here. The question that I'm asking is, what type of cultural content would you prefer to use in your teaching? And we'll think about why later. Content that deals with the local places and people. Content that deals primarily with the life and culture of other English-speaking countries, since we're in a predominantly English-speaking country, or content that deals with the life and culture of various countries around the world. And these questions are adapted from a Chilean study, actually. So they asked these questions, a study by McKay, and I've got the reference at the end of the presentation. And again, there's no right or wrong answer for this. So it depends really on your teaching context. So the content that deals with local places and people, if you're teaching Australian law, you might want to talk about, you know, the Australian culture and Australian law, because that's the context of your teaching. Many people, I think, would like to include content that deals with the life and culture of various countries around the world. And I haven't got any takers for content that deals primarily with the life and culture of other English-speaking countries. And I think we might be a self-selecting group that really want to, you know, get that global learning into our teaching.
I'm sorry, and I think perhaps there's one answer missing, and that's all of the above.
Yeah, that's the other thing. We haven't given you the option to do that, and that's what I mean about your context. So depending on the context of your teaching, you might want to include everything, but there might also be times where you only want to include one type.
Yeah, and I think generally, you know, just because, you know, I'm just talking from a science and engineering context, generally most examples and whatever it is tends to come from you know, a Western perspective. And I think this is where if we are teaching, you know, in an environment where we've got that cultural diversity, it's really important for us to acknowledge that in the kind of examples that we, you know, pick up on. Yeah.
And yeah, we don't have much time left, so I'm going to quickly go through some slides. So we've moved from that concept of internationalization to global learning, and now I think we're coming to this this concept of culturally dynamic partnership, and we really like this as a group. It's a collaborative approach to working across cultures in a culturally safe environment, and we bolded all of the important things here, where all stakeholders interact in mutual learning relationships and develop the knowledge, attitudes and skills required to work in equitable partnerships across dynamic and diverse cultures. So we're bringing in all of those concepts that we've talked about. And I bolded that knowledge, attitudes and skills, because really it all comes down to learning outcomes. You know, if our students have got those knowledge, attitudes and skills, and maybe we need to include more of those culturally competent global citizenship skills in our learning outcomes as well, and make sure that we do tick those boxes and cover those. And these are just some ideas that we can use for embedding cultural content in our teaching. And a lot of them, you know, I've done as much international teaching as Riva or Paul, but I have done quite a bit. And these are the sorts of strategies that I might use for embedding cultural content. Some other ideas I'm going to go quickly through are embedding cultural content and other Englishes. So just that knowledge and that awareness that there are other Englishes that people use. So Aboriginal English is spoken by an estimated 80% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. and their English has its own structures and rules. The next example is about using examples from other cultures, such as the Kawa model that was developed by Japanese and Canadian rehabilitation professionals for people like occupational therapists here in Australia. And we can find lots of resources if we look about embedding cultural content and other Englishes into our teaching, and here's just a couple here. So our big question, are we preparing students appropriately for global citizenship? And we wanted to know what sort of tools you use and where you get those tools from and where you keep them. So going on to the next slide about building a global learning toolkit. That's something that we want to do, but we also want to know, is there a website that you go to? Are there resources that you go to? Is there a need for a brand new global learning toolkit, or can we add these type of resources to something that already exists?
Or, whether it's worthwhile actually, contributing to a repository, so that we can curate a range of, resources that we can all sort of dip into when we need. So
yeah, actually, Katrina makes a really good point in the chat there. Local places and people could also include Indigenous cultural content, and that, when we started this, it was before the global pandemic. It was before Black Lives Matter. It's changing all the time. The ideas and the things that we need to cover, and the resources that we need, and the conversations that we need to have, and for sure the Indigenous cultural content. Do we need to add these resources to some sort of resource that already exists?
And I think all of us have these intentions. However, given the kind of lives that we lead and the sort of pressures that we have as academics, sometimes for me, I don't know, I think I get some ideas here and there, and it's something that I can adapt. So this is So Katrina says 4 minutes to go, and we'd really like you to stay in contact with us and, send us some ideas for what sort of things you would put in a global toolkit, learning toolkit, what sort of things you want from a global learning toolkit. If you know of any resources that are already out there, any websites that perhaps we could contribute to, or do we really need to start making some new resource, and adding those resources to it? So we'd really love to hear from you. And which brings us to our last slide. We thank you for being part of this discussion. It was great to get your comments and your ideas, and we do really look forward to collaborating with you and just sharing those ideas. Yep.
And Reverend Paul, any last thoughts, or panel or discussion partners? Any other last thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we leave?
Claire. Yep, go ahead, Claire.
Claire's got one.
Very, very quickly. I think the idea of global learning it falls down the list of things that academics focus on, because there are so much pressure. So I would applaud any efforts to put a toolkit together that actually makes internationalisation / global learning easier to prioritise, because at the moment there are so many other pressures on most academics that it's very difficult for them to consider the complexity of making their curriculum more sensitive to this issue. So anything that would make it easier, I think, will be a move in the right direction.
Thanks, Claire. Great point. And I think Reva and Paul, because part of their roles are as academics as well. So, I think they would agree wholeheartedly.
What we need is, basically, we all, if we can plug into, some resource somewhere and, pick up an idea or two and then adapt that to what we're doing on an everyday basis, I think that that would be helpful. So,
Yeah.
So that's the whole idea behind the Global Learning Toolkit. And we see this as an opportunity for all of us to come together and, again, celebrating all these diverse perspectives and ideas.
Sophie has got a really good comment in there. Do you meet with resistance from students? And that's a great question. And do we have time for another presentation on that one? How are we going to deal with that? It's all about engaging students, isn't it?
I think it starts with us, changing our attitudes, like, our biases.
Yeah.
If it's evident to students, they pick up on that, and, that sort of, pushes this whole attitude thing that we have. So I think if we are more, aware of this, and that's part of another project that I'm involved in, where we're trying to raise awareness of academics, especially, those of us who are in this context. In science and engineering, we tend to be very objective. We don't think about these things, but these things do matter in a learning and teaching environment. So, that's part of another project that we're trying to.
You just showed your implicit bias against people from science and engineering.
I think about those.
And on that note, thank you very much for that wonderful panel discussion. And I think there are still a lot of things to discuss. I think that was a great question to end on, Sophia, because it does.
Yeah, thanks, Sophia.
Thank you, everyone.
You're absolutely right. That's a way to go forward. I think in COVID, we've seen a lot more sharing, and we have opportunities, I think, for such a toolkit as well. So thank you again.
Yeah.